Good morning, everybody. I'm Rachel from CFE. I hope you've all enjoyed the first sessions of this morning, and welcome to the first workshop. The workshop is Multiple and Complex Needs in Employment, Providing Support for Success, and it's kindly being delivered by Fulfilling Lives South East. And I have here, I'm very delighted to welcome Andre Ralph, who's the co-production and engagement lead for Fulfilling Lives South East, who will be facilitating the session. Feel free to use this chat to pose any questions or comments. There's a little exercise partway through the presentation where I'll try to pick out any views that have been shared related to that particular question. And then if you have put any questions to Andre throughout the session or right at the end, that's where we'll come to raise those with her. The presentation will be running, or the workshop, until 10 to 1. So it'll be around about towards that time that we come back to you for more of those questions. And yeah, I hand over to you, Andre. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. Really pleased to be here and being able to share our learning with you this morning. I was saying earlier I probably shouldn't have watched the previous part because it just needed a moment after that to prepare myself again for the presentation that I'm going to give to you. So anyway, thank you for joining. As Rachel said, I'm the co-production and engagement lead for Fulfilling Lives South East, and I'm going to share with you this morning the learning that we have put together from our employment programme that we've been running for the last 7 years throughout the Fulfilling Lives programme. So I'm just going to share my screen and hope the technology works as it should. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that okay. So basically, we've been running an employment programme with Fulfilling Lives South East throughout the project, and I'm going to share some of the reasoning behind that, some of the benefits, and just some of the tools and techniques that we've learned and gathered along the way, and then point you in the direction of where all that learning is, so that you can go and find that for yourself later. We've put it all into a resource, which I'll share the links with you a bit later on at the end of the presentation. But as the slide there says, it's the objectives for my presentation with you today is about sharing the learning, sharing those tools that we've picked up and used, demonstrating how that learning can be adapted and utilised by all organisations and employers, and encouraging consideration of how that can be done. So it's not just about specific sort of sectors or anything like that. This can be taken on by any employer in any situation. And just really to highlight the benefits of employing people with lived experience of MCN, multiple complex needs and multiple disadvantage, and what huge, enormous benefits they can bring to an organisation and for themselves and for the employer. So as you're probably already aware, Fulfilling Lives South East is one of the 12 partnerships of local organisations working together to improve services for people with multiple complex needs. Our particular programme and project is based across kind of Brighton and Hove, Eastbourne and Hastings. So that's the area we cover. And we had kind of 3 sort of offices or hubs in each of those areas specifically. One of the key parts of the project, and something that was really important from very early on, has been about employing people with lived experience within the project. So actually as part of the staff team all the way through. And that's been done through a role we call project consultant or project consultant assistant. That role has grown and developed, as you'll see. Names have changed and various other things along the way as we've learned and grown and developed the role. The key thing for us when we were thinking about the project was that the service user involvement really needed to be central. And even before the bid was kind of designed and put forward for the funding, that was one of the key things, that people wanted service user involvement to be central, so within those roles. So the role was designed really to act as a bridge between services and service users, so that people could use their lived experience within a sort of a way of working within their professional skills as well. So it wasn't just about you're here just for your lived experience or just for your skills. Those can be combined and produce a really useful package for people. Thinking about service user leadership as well to reach organisations at all levels. We've already heard this morning how impactful and how important the story is, and those real life stories of people experiencing the difficulties within systems and services. So that was a way of us being able to incorporate that within the programme. And also to act as champions for co-production, which again, you'll have heard that term this morning, lived experience, peer research, peer support, and just engaging service users from other organisations, both within our own project, but within organisations in the areas we were working in as well. So the key focus of that role was really about breaking down the stigma around lived experience, and offering the opportunity for people to share that experience in a professional capacity. The role originally was designed to last around 12 months. Very early on, it was kind of realised that was too short, that wasn't long enough for people to settle into the role properly and start learning and developing. One of the key things about the role was that it was to enable people who were able to take on that role to grow and develop within it as well. So there was lots of personal development and professional development. A year wasn't long enough for that to happen, really. People were just sort of starting to get settled. So following consultation with volunteers, the service user team, the rest of the project team, the role was actually extended to 18 months, which in some ways, again, was still not long enough. And in an ideal world, we'd have liked it to be longer, but it was balancing between enabling as many people as possible to have that opportunity, with the opportunity being really useful and valued by people and being able to kind of be useful for people's professional development. That role has grown and developed throughout the project. So throughout the 8 years, it's kind of changed and been adapted and tweaked as we've gone along. One of the things that we've always been really strong about within the Fulfilling Lives programme in our area is about learning and constantly being able to kind of reflect and look back and think, okay, what do we need to change? What do we need to adapt? So that's where that's come in. And the PC role was certainly one of those things that did that. Just some statistics to sort of set the scene, really. We've employed a total of 41 people so far within the project. We have 4, it's currently 4, though these figures need to be updated. One of those moved on since this was done. So there's people still involved within the project, and they are going to stay right to the end. 3 of those have already got other roles, though, so they've got a role to move on to once the project's finished. 16 have moved on to new employment whilst working for Fulfilling Lives. Others have got employment within 6 months of leaving Fulfilling Lives. So it's been really successful in terms of some of the people that we've employed and worked with. This might have been their first role either out of recovery, or they may not have worked for many years. So I think it's really testament to the project and the way we've worked that it's been really successful for quite a percentage of people. Obviously, it's not worked for some, and you'll see there are a percentage for people that have not been able to completely fulfil that contract. The reasons behind that we'll look at a bit later on in the presentation. And again, it's something we've learned from as we've gone along. So that's just to sort of set the scene in terms of the data and the statistics for you. One of the things when we were thinking about this and thinking about the presentations is that actually, what isn't it a bit too much? Why would employers want to make special arrangements? If we're thinking about this learning being rolled out to employers, aren't we kind of saying, actually, it's too much effort, it's too much hard work, who would want to do this? And actually, that's a really valid question. But I think, and I hope you'll gain from the end of this presentation, that everything we've talked about and everything we've learned and we're presenting to you today, and everything that we're promoting in our toolkit, which I'll share with you at the end, it benefits every employee. It's not just about people with lived experience or having experienced multiple disadvantage. By benefiting every employee, we're benefiting every employer as well through better productivity, more open communication, less sickness, happier, healthier, supportive workplaces. And with the focus around well-being currently, particularly after the COVID pandemic, this is really key stuff. This is stuff that kind of can be rolled out throughout an organisation. After all, we've all got physical and mental health, and everyone goes through difficult experiences that may impact or perform how they work. So this is really important in stuff, I think, to share across organisations and across sectors. So just as a sort of summary really here, one of the things we wanted to look at when we were doing this and kind of bringing this together at the end of the programme was to think about, well, what are the benefits either to the employer or to the employee? Some of those are listed on the screen there, as you see. So for the employee particularly, there's something really around them being invested in their work. There's such a passion and a commitment to do this work and to be able to share that voice. And to be able to grow professionally in a structured and supported environment as well. So an environment that understands that actually things may come up, there may need to be conversations, there may need to be flexibility and changes that are kind of incorporated into their working environment. It's an opportunity for them to develop confidence and skills, and that's certainly something I've been doing some kind of final supervisions and sort of finishing up with some of the members of my team. And that's been a really key element of what the program's kind of been able to do for people, is to allow that time and space for people to develop confidence and be able to challenge themselves in a way that isn't too frightening. So be able to step out of their comfort zone, but at a pace that kind of suits them. And the chance to make something really positive out of what, you know, potentially really negative experiences that they've had. So that's sort of the employee. For the employer, it's about having a kind of really client-centered knowledge of the system. So it's a knowledge of the system that they wouldn't necessarily have without having that experience of someone who's been through it. There's increased client trust. So if you're working with clients that are going through services, knowing that someone who's working within that organisation has experienced that too, and has got through it and has succeeded and understands the barriers and the difficulties and is able to help someone negotiate their way through that, is a huge plus, a really huge plus for any sort of employer and any service. So it's really providing a bridge between the client and the service in a quite a unique way and a really sort of person-centered way. One of the things that has been mentioned quite a bit is that people with lived experience that are on staff groups and working as employees have a real genuine patience and belief in clients because they've been there. They know what it feels like, they know what the struggle's like, and they've managed to get through. So they know that it's possible, and they know for their clients that it's possible. So they've got that enhanced ability to connect with clients. We've often sort of heard it when we've been doing sort of service user groups and things like that, when talking to clients about how, you know, what's it like having someone who has lived experience of multiple complex needs as your mentor or as your project consultant. And it got time and time again, there were people who come up with, they just know, and I just know that they know. So it's almost like there's this unspoken understanding really that goes within that, which is really, really valuable, and can kind of overcome a lot of the barriers that can come up to using services and systems. So that's some of the benefits. And as I've already mentioned, you know, isn't it actually just about creating supportive, accessible workplaces for everyone? It's not about sort of pinpointing out a particular group of people. It's about supporting people to do their jobs well. And in the current climate, in all of the things that are being, you know, recognised around well-being, this is really important stuff to sort of share across. And it's the learning that we've gained from this project can be used quite universally. So how did we do what we did? Some of the things that we've done are quite simple, and you'll see as we go through, but all of the work that we did within the employment programme and employing those people in as part of that group and part of our staff team were underpinned by 3 key principles, which if you've been watching the kind of presentations this morning, you'll probably have heard these. Psychologically informed environment, so really thinking about the environment that people are coming into and how that might affect them. Co-production, so sharing of power, working with people, getting the people that are really, you know, using those services around the table and working with an equal kind of relationship rather than just consulting and those sorts of things, moving that up the ladder. And then trauma-informed practice, so being conscious of how trauma affects all of us, and particularly for people with lived experience of multiple complex needs and multiple disadvantage, how that trauma, you know, will impact on how they respond to services, how they might engage, all of those things, and then how that learning can be taken and shared. As I've mentioned there's just a sort of definition really of what a psychologically informed environment looks like, but it really is about considering the thinking, the emotions, the personalities and the past experience of clients and staff within an organisation, and thinking about how they might be affected within the spaces that you have. None of us have perfect spaces to work in, you know, that's the reality, but there's lots we can do to make those spaces much more psychologically informed with just a bit of thought and a bit of kind of talking to the people that are using those spaces. On this slide here, you'll see some of the examples that we worked with. So establishing and promoting a culture of reflective practice, thinking about continuously learning, understanding that everyone's an individual, and helping people to be part of the project and contribute to the project, and specifically within the employment programme to work within the project in a way that works for them and you know, helps them to work within their unique needs and abilities. Constantly reflecting and thinking, what could we do better? How could we make this better? Constantly having that two-way communication and feedback, and making sure that anything that is decided, people know how that's been decided and why it's been decided and what part their thoughts and views played in that conversation. And then just some things around the physical environment as well, thinking about the space. What does it feel like to walk into that space? Spaces can be quite triggering for people with experience of multiple disadvantage. So thinking about what you can do, and for people that are employed within the programme, thinking about what that office environment might look like, how that might feel, how flexible can we be within that, what sort of individual differences can we apply within that space to make it feel more comfortable and easier for people to be able to perform to their best at the end of the day. Co-production, as I've already mentioned, is a way, it's thinking about how you can share power as much as possible, and making it meaningful for people with lived experience. So really thinking about how people can work together. So it's not just about consulting, it's about thinking how people can be involved in the design, the delivery, the commissioning of the service. And again, having people employed within the project meant that we were able to do that in a much more straightforward way in some ways, because those people were automatically part of those conversations about how the project ran. Trauma-informed practice. Hard Edges report mentioned that 85% of people with multiple complex needs have experienced trauma in childhood. That will have an impact on the way that they engage, the way that services are, need to respond. So really having an awareness of how trauma can affect people and how that might impact within the employment programme, and what we need to be thinking about in terms of doing that. So thinking about policies and practices that assist healing, rather than kind of ostracising people or making them feel that they need to almost like hide that side of things. One of the things we did within Fulfilling Lives South East was we worked with a set of principles that were already in existence, but we kind of modified them to work within our project. So there were 5 key principles around safety, trust, collaboration, choice and voice. And we tried to embed all of those things in everything we do and everything we did, so that we could create a trauma-informed culture that enabled and encouraged healing and recovery for people. So as much as it was about getting the work done, it was also about the people within that process and learning how to do that in a way that balanced those things out and meant that people could thrive within that environment as well. Just on the screen here, we've listed some of the ways, and we'll go into some of these in a bit more detail as we go through the presentation, but some of the ways that we incorporated trauma-informed practice and PI and co-production into the work. So we looked at our recruitment processes, our induction processes, how to introduce flexible working and how we could work with HR around doing that, reflective practice, what supervision looked like and what development looked like for those people within the project that were working as project consultants. It was really clear early on that getting this stuff right happens almost before you even employ someone. So it's thinking about what for those people that it didn't work for, what happened, what was that about? And it wasn't about technical skills generally, it was about psychological factors or well-being factors. So it was about, when we were thinking about learning and developing the project and the role, it was how do we help people early on in the process to perhaps recognise that maybe they're not ready for this role just yet, or what can we do to support them within that, so that they can succeed. Sometimes it really was the case that people weren't ready to move on into employment, but that doesn't have to be a negative experience. That can be done in a way that's supportive and supports people to move perhaps back into voluntary work or move on and leave the role, but on a positive basis as well. So there's lots of things you can do around that. When we were thinking about how early can we tap into really getting this stuff right, it was clear that, as I say, even from the application stage, you can create a much more simpler application form. We come under Brighton Housing Trust as a kind of overarching organisation, and we're part of that charity. So there was a standard application form, but we were able, in consultation with HR, to create a simpler one that actually made it quite specific what we were asking for. We were able to set up our interviews so that we could give plenty of time for people to answer questions, be able to put people at ease, allow people to take breaks if they needed to, think about what the questions look like and focusing more on psychological aspects rather than skills. One of the things we did was actually give the interview questions to interviewees at their interview, so they weren't having to try and remember what the questions were. It's about recognising it won't be perfect every time, being okay with that. Feeding back in a supportive way. So those that did, so every person that attended an interview had a feedback session afterwards, which was around supportive and enabling them to move on from that. And some of the things we've talked about were kind of including an emotional intelligence test at some point in the interview process. Although we never actually got time to do that, that's something that you might want to consider. Through induction and probation, we created specific induction workbooks. We designed activities so that the role built up and people were able to perform that over a series of weeks and months. We didn't expect people to do it straight away. When it came to probation, we'd worked up to that probation review so that people understood that process and knew what they were going to be asked, and they would know beforehand if there were any issues around that they needed to be aware of, so that we could work with them before they got to probation. It was all about supporting and enabling people to do their best at the end of the day. We wanted people to succeed in this role so that they could take that forward. And one of the biggest things for us was around creating a space where people felt able to seek support and be open about what they needed, whatever that was, and so that we could have a conversation about whether we could help them achieve it or whether that was something we could support them to do outside of the role, whatever that might look like. So it was really about creating that space for people to reach out when they needed to, particularly in those first really kind of pivotal months of the role. We created throughout the time that people were within the role, there was a bespoke training program which I put together, which is around all of the key aspects of the role that they would need to do well. So supporting volunteers, personal effectiveness, leading service user groups and how to do that well. And we had kind of full team training days where people came along and did that. And it was specifically related to the role that they had. So although they had access to the kind of universal training program as well and did all of those things, and BHT Sussex provides an enormous amount of training for staff, they had access to all of that, but this was specific training that we did within the role so that they were really sure and comfortable with the tasks that they were being asked to do. And of course, regular supervisions was a key part of that, but we also introduced development sessions, which I'll talk about a bit later as well. And all of those sessions it wasn't just about what work are you doing, what have you done, what haven't you done. It was about development and professional development and using coaching techniques and reflective practice and being trauma informed and psychologically aware within those conversations as well. So that it was, again, that safe space that people could come and really talk about where they were at and what they needed and what they felt they were doing well and what they might need to develop on. Okay, so this is the bit where I just got a little activity for you, and I'm hoping you'll be able to sort of feed into the chat. But if you could just for a couple of minutes maybe just think about, from some of the things that I've talked about before, and some of the things that we've introduced as part of our project, what's the one thing that you think right now that you could take back to your organisation that would embed trauma-informed processes and psychologically informed environment principles or co-production into your recruitment and induction process? So just thinking about that really early stages, what's one thing you could take from what we've talked about this morning already that could be part of that process? I'll give you a couple of minutes just to think about that.
If attendees want to put their thoughts in response to that question into the chat, I can give a quick scan for Andre and come back with some
thank you, Rachel.
Suggestions in a moment. Thanks.
I can see the chat box going up a little bit. Quite pleased I can see the chat actually. I wasn't sure I'd be able to see it.
So some of the things that are coming through then, Andre, are one of the attendees, Claire, loves what you were suggesting about the interview process, having copies of the questions and allowing for breaks. Other suggestions coming up from Dion Peters, simplifying the application form possibly. Thomas Clarity, apologies for your pronunciation of your surname there. Maybe asking people about the recruitment stage, about what motivates them, so you can help them to be fulfilled in their role.
Yeah, that's really good.
Other suggestions include consistent mandatory training across the organisation for new starters once they are recruited. Again, thinking about the application process is another suggestion here from Jackie about ensuring that it doesn't rely on lots of form filling or even internet access, that it can be part of informal formal chat. So yeah, lots of ideas coming through.
Great.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. Hopefully some of this will just spark some ideas for people about just some simple things that people can do in terms of those processes. And it really doesn't take much. I mean, you mentioned about the simplified application form. We literally, where you would normally get the kind of big open space where it says, you know, please tell us why you want this job kind of thing, addressing the elements of the person spec. All we did to simplify it was literally take each of those elements and make a box for each one so that people were really clear what they needed to address. It's simple things like that that just made it easier for people to be able to understand. And we also just put a few examples. So, you know, if people have got voluntary work experience, include that. You know, that's just as relevant. If you've got personal experience, include that. It's just as relevant. So just kind of a few prompts for people as well. So.
And Andrew, just before you go back into the next part of your presentation, there's just one question from the floor, which I think relates to the earlier part, and that's from Tom, who just wonders if you're able to name some of the employers who are involved in the programme.
So we, in terms of the employment programme, we employed ourselves. So it was the Southeast Fulfilling Life Southeast project ourselves. We are the employer. So as part of this, the project consultants that worked within the Fulfilling Lives South East team as part of the programme. So we didn't go out to external employers and do like some employment programmes that I know other areas have done. We actually employed within the project ourselves. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks for answering that, Andrea. I will turn myself back onto mute and video off and let you carry on with the workshop.
Thank you for your help with that, Rachel. That's brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for kind of your thoughts and just and engaging in that process. I think it's just really good to take something and start thinking about it straight away. So yeah, I mean, a couple of key pieces of learning that came out for us during those sort of thinking about those first 6 months, the probation period that people were working, was that it was really important and beneficial for everyone to be clear about what the expectations were. So almost like, not prescriptive, but almost actually detailing in a lot of ways. We had a kind of almost like a work activity list so people could see exactly what they'd be expected to do and what that involved. It just really helped people to feel they weren't having to kind of ask questions all of the time when they didn't perhaps have the confidence to do that, but to know exactly what they would be expected and what each activity involved, which was really helpful. And the feedback was that that was a really useful thing to do. One of the key things that we've realised as well is that managers and supervisors need to have those people skills and kind of psychological awareness and tools. So it's not just about knowing how well a service runs and how to do that and the activities of enabling that service to run. It's about being able to connect with people and to kind of have empathy and understanding of where people are at and what they might need and to how to have those conversations, but also have some tools around coaching and sort of motivational interviewing and those sorts of techniques, just to help have those conversations and to help people bring out some of the things that they might need to talk about. So it's about finding a balance between support and performance. Ultimately, you know, a job has a role and that role has things that need to happen and people need to be able to perform the tasks of that role. But it's about finding a balance between that and the support that you can put in place as well. And sometimes that can be difficult to get right and maintain all the time. You know, we didn't get it right every time. And there were lots of times we had to have lots of conversations about, that didn't work. How can we fix that? What can we do to make that right next time? But it's really about working with individuals where they're at and having conversations, asking, what can we do? Being really honest and upfront about, as an employer, what you're able to do, what's within your remit, and what would fall to the individual to be able to access themselves, but then giving them the support to be able to do that as well. So it's about empowering. What we wanted to do was that when people had finished their role with us after that 18 months, that they could sort of step off from the programme and from the project into another organisation that may not have all of that backup, but feel confident that they could maintain their well-being, maintain their recovery, use the skills that they'd learned and ask for help when they needed it, and also take some of that experience with them to hopefully kind of filter into new organisations and help them become better as well. One of the things I mentioned was the development sessions. One of the unique things we did within this role was we employed an engagement and development worker, which I'm very proud to say was me at the beginning of my time with Fulfilling Lives South East. I was employed to take this role on. It was a role that developed out of a need really within the first few years, in the sense that the project worked over 3 locations, so Hastings, Eastbourne and Brighton, and we had 3 PCs or PC assistants in each location. And it was too much, physically too much, for the service user engagement coordinator to be in 3 locations all at the same time to support everybody in a way that we wanted people to be supported. So the role, the engagement and development worker role, was created and started around July 2017. And for the first year of that role, we really kind of were quite open about what that might look like. And lots of consultation, lots of conversations, lots of discussion, lots of trial and error about how we could support people the best using that extra kind of facility that we were able to have. And lots of my role at that time was about, you know, what works for people, what doesn't work for people, what would be useful, even down to kind of how long a session should be and what should it involve, all of those things. We kind of used that first year to really learn about and hone that role down. And ultimately it became a dedicated one-to-one space for individuals to work on their professional development, but also linking that with their wellbeing strategies and keeping that balance between the two, so that we use reflective practice and all sorts of other coaching techniques that I've already mentioned, just to enable people to stretch and grow within their roles. So it was in addition to supervision initially, so people had their supervisions, which again were quite holistic, but these were particularly dedicated development sessions that they also had once a month after their induction period. And it could be anything. It was an open forum to discuss anything that might affect their working life or their ability to do their job. So often those things were around well-being and around just enabling and supporting and empowering people to kind of maintain their own well-being within their roles. So I had conversations around food and how food can affect energy, and how sleeping patterns, what sort of well-being activities people might use, how people could incorporate breaks into their day, how people could use the flexibility that was available to support them. And particularly that became key when COVID hit, and we were quite concerned about how people might feel suddenly being kind of everybody quite isolated and online. So we upped our game a lot and had daily check-ins with people, which continued throughout the project and still do right to the end. People really enjoyed that. Just having a check-in in the morning, everyone together on the screen, and you know, talking about where people are at and things. But really making sure that people are okay during that period, and using those development sessions, really key to ensuring that people were supported within that time and still able to perform their roles, because it was different for all of us. We were all thrown into this new world, so we were all kind of experiencing difficulties, so making sure that we were able to share that. All of those sessions, much like supervision, we set actions, there was skills practice, we looked at trying techniques or strategies, each person had a development plan, and we used those coaching techniques to work through those. So it was still a structured process, but in a very holistic and flexible and open way, if that makes sense. And each of those development sessions was recorded as well, so people had notes and things to refer back to. Okay, so quick poll here at this point. I'm going to get you interactive again, if that's okay with everyone. And I think Severin's going to help me on this one if he's still, there we go, perfect, thank you. So do you feel confident that your managers and supervisors are sufficiently trained and experienced to take a holistic approach in terms of things like supervision and development and having those conversations? So you should have a poll pop up on your screen now. That's just a very simple yes, no, or not sure. And it would just be really useful to see what people's thoughts are around that. We'll give that a couple of minutes, and then I think Severin's going to show us the results of that. So. Another minute or so. Are we probably, I'm not sure how, I know Severin can see how many people have responded, so I'll hand it over to you, Severin, when we're ready, when you think we're ready. Okay. That's interesting, that's good. I'm really, really pleased to see that 64% are saying yes, that's fantastic. Not sure, completely get that. It's an interesting thing, and sometimes it's a sort of a question like that, you spring it on you and you're thinking, oh, don't really know, because do we do that? And no, 14%, yeah, that doesn't surprise me in some ways. But 64% yes is fantastic. Hopefully, and I know the slides will be shared and things like that, hopefully you'll be able to take all of this information away with you and back to your organisations and work within that. But one of the key things is certainly around training and ongoing training, which I think was already mentioned for managers, and that's one of the things we've been doing as well. So thank you very much everyone for participating in that. Really useful, thank you. Okay. Can't move my slide on now. Hang on a second. There we go. One of the things that I've already mentioned quite a bit, and it's something it's something I've developed a real passion for, a real kind of understanding of as I've gone through this role with the project. Something I don't think I had an awareness of before, quite in the same way, is that well-being is uniquely and intrinsically linked to professional development and work performance. You cannot have one without the other. And I think that's something that, you know, as I say, has been recognised recently with the COVID pandemic, and employers are starting to understand that a lot more. But it's certainly something within this project, within the employment programme that we've run, that it's become pivotal and central to everything that we've done. And it's that understanding that actually it's not a one-size-fits-all. Wellness and well-being are uniquely individual to each and every person. So whatever you're doing around well-being, and the conversations we had were really about trying to look at individual needs and being as holistic as possible and as flexible as possible and as creative as possible, asking people what works for them. You know, for some people it might be around things like meditation and going for a walk and taking a break, or listening to a podcast or something like that, or, you know, the eating healthily and all of those things that we might instantly think of. But it's also important to be aware that for some people, wellness is contained in actually being able to do their job well. So that might be, you know, where you're working with people to enable them to remain well, is about making sure they can do the job well and they know what they're doing and they feel confident within that. So it's anything and everything that enables a person to stay well. And obviously in this situation, we're talking about being able to perform their role at work, but that obviously has a knock-on effect of them being able to remain well and being able to, you know, be okay in their personal lives as well. For us, as I say, initially that was done in development sessions, and we had that focus, really that space to do that, and creating that safe space to have those conversations. But this is something that can be done and should be done, I think, in supervision. Wellness should be a kind of set agenda item on a supervision sort of form or conversation that you might have, because we all need to think about our well-being at work. You know, as I say, you can't have one without the other, really, and all of us have times when our well-being and things that are happening for us can impact how we perform at work. And if we can create a space where employers and organisations are open to having those conversations and supporting people early on, we won't get into situations where people are feeling they have to hide things, or they have to make up illnesses because they can't really say that they're struggling, or something's happened for them and they need to maybe take things a bit easier for a while. So it's really about embedding wellness within the workplace as within all of the things that you're doing and all the processes that you're doing. One of the ways we did that, and one of the pieces of legacy that we've incorporated, is wellness action plans. Some of you have probably heard of these before, some of you may not. They're used quite a lot in recovery kind of services and programs, but it's becoming more widely accepted that actually we can all benefit from having a wellness action plan, even if it's not a physical document, but just having those thought processes around what might trigger us, what situations or circumstances or events might cause a person to become unwell, anxious, stressed, just kind of be triggered by the, you know, the experiences they're in, what might bring trauma up for them or re-traumatize them. Thinking about those things early on before it happens. Having a thought about what wellness activities are helpful. What do people know works? You know, what can they do? What have they learned along the way? Can you suggest other things that might work? Can you trial out some things that might work for people? Thinking about what the first signs of that might look like, you know, so rather than waiting till somebody maybe has taken some time off sick, or their work performance has dropped right off, or they're arriving late, you know, every morning, or things like, start what might be the first signs. So some of the conversations we have with people is, when I was having development sessions, is people might say, well, actually I might just seem a little distracted, or I might start coming in a bit later, or not be, it might be taking more breaks, and those little things that sometimes when they're in that space they wouldn't even know they're doing, but it's almost like a sort of pattern of behaviours that people fall into that happen when well-being is starting to be affected. So have those conversations early on so that people know what to look for, and then have a conversation about, you know, if that happens, what would the person want to happen? Would they want a manager, for example, to point that out and observe that that's happened? And that's doable. That doesn't have to be a kind of a negative thing. That can be a really supportive thing. Or would they prefer a colleague did it? How do you want that to happen? How would somebody want that conversation to be started initially? And again, if you're having these conversations in supervisions and early on, and part of your all of the policies and procedures that you have and the processes that you have in your environment, generally speaking, people will feel comfortable to come and say, actually, I'm not in a great place today, or I'm struggling a bit at the moment. Can we have a chat about how I might be able to work through that or do something flexible for a while? And then obviously thinking about as well, if somebody does need to take a period of leave around their well-being, how are you going to successfully make sure their return to work happens? So quite often, if people have had to take some time off, either for recovery or a sort of well-being issue, it might be a period of time, it might be several weeks, and it can feel really daunting for people to come back after that time. You know, who do I need to tell? Who knows? What are people going to think of me? All of that kind of stuff can happen. So have that conversation early on. What would the person want in terms of that return? What would make them feel comfortable? Would it be, you know, having an informal coffee before the start of the working day on the first day back? Would they be okay with people knowing and being supportive? Have those conversations early on, and a wellness action plan can really help to do that. And you can have it documented if that works, or it can be a kind of bit more of an informal discussion, but have the discussion. That's something we really found was important. And you're not alone as an employer and an organisation. You're not alone in this. There are lots of people out there, lots of organisations, lots of support services that can help. And we've used those as a project. We've reached out when we needed to people like Mind, to Remploy, Southdown in our area do an employment support programme. So have a look around. You don't have to do everything as a manager or as an organisation yourself. You don't have to be an expert in everything well-being or everything support for employees with lived experience of multiple disadvantage. Reach out. There are lots of people out there that will help and support you to do that. You might have, as an organisation, you might have a staff kind of well-being or welfare system already in place that you can tap into as well. So do reach out. Don't feel alone in that process, and reach out to other organisations and things like that. They might be having similar conversations or similar issues come up. So how could you work together to support each other? As I mentioned early on, we have now put all of this learning for our employment programme, so all 7.5 or so years of the learning and all of the things I've touched on in this presentation are in our Employers Toolkit, which is available at the link on the slide there, and I'm sure we can share that afterwards as well with people. But it's all in there, and it's done in a kind of sense of some activities, some questions to ask, some reflective things to do, really sort of practical advice on how you can implement some of this learning into your organisation, whatever that organisation might look like and be. And it's not just about employing people with lived experience of multiple complex needs or multiple disadvantage. These are things that can support all of your staff across the organisation and create a much more supportive, welcoming, trusting environment for people to work in which people thrive and really want to succeed and be able to work for the organisation well and do their best. So that's where to find all of this stuff. The link there. Just as a sort of final point, I wanted to share just some of the legacy and outcomes. We are coming to the end of the project, as we all know. So we were thinking, what do we do with this learning? One of the things is the toolkit, as I mentioned, that's actually been downloaded over 100 times since it was publicised in April on our website. So that's phenomenal. BHT Sussex, the charity we come under, have committed to employ more people with lived experience and to utilise the toolkit to do that and support staff across the organisation, so not just those with lived experience. We've fed into various policies and procedures. One of the most recent was the performance management process and embedded wellbeing in that. So now it's far less of a kind of penalising process and much more of a supportive process to enable things to be addressed and supported really early on. Again, to enable people to succeed. Our learning is going to be will remain on the BHT Sussex website for around 2 years, even after the programme ends. They've committed to that, which is fantastic. So you'll be able to access this stuff then. And all of these resources are going to be carried over into the new Pan Sussex Changing Futures programme as well. So we'll be able to, we won't be starting from scratch with that programme. And I'm very fortunate that I'm going to be working on that programme as well. So I'll be taking all of the knowledge that I have with me too. So that's just some of the legacy that from the programme that we'll be taking and sharing and where it's going. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening. I know it probably feels like a lot of information, but trying to fit a 7.5-year programme into an hour is quite a lot. So hopefully you've managed to keep up and been able to kind of take something from that and haven't blinded you with information. Please do have a look at our website and resources for information. There's loads and loads on there around co-production and employing people with lived experience of multiple disadvantage. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then we'll take some questions. I think we've still got time. So.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It was really fascinating to listen to. For taking the time to present it. We've got a couple of questions through already. One of the earlier ones was whether you notice any themes for people recovering from substance misuse as opposed to mental health needs.
One of the really interesting things that stood out for us, and in some ways it was a bit of a surprise, but wasn't when we really thought about it, was actually people coming to us from recovering from substance misuse had a much stronger and wider network of support already, whereas those coming from perhaps mental wellbeing recovery and mental health recovery didn't. They were very much on their own. So in a lot of ways, the support that a lot of the support we had to provide was more perhaps for people around those mental wellbeing issues than around substance misuse and those sort of issues, because it was more when I was having discussions with people around that, they would say, actually, yeah, I just need to reach out to my network and I need to go back to my group, or I need to do, the support was in place and it seems to travel with the person. Whereas mental health wise, it's almost like you have your treatment or whatever that might be, and then that's it, you go get on with it. So that was something we found it was really important that when we sort of recognised that early on, and that was where we really started thinking about, right, we need to support people with this stuff because this is the bit that's missing elsewhere. So yeah, that was one of the key things, I think. I think that also had an implication with how resilient people were in terms of when there was a blip or when something went wrong for people. So again, people who maybe were experiencing mental health difficulty while they were working with us felt very alone and didn't really have the resources within themselves necessarily to know what to do about it. So you were almost very much starting from that support process early on and having those conversations where, as I say, for the people coming from maybe a substance misuse recovery journey, if those blips came up, it was an easier process to reconnect with the support they had. So I guess that was the main theme that came out for us, I think.
Thank you, Andrea. I hope that was helpful to the person who posed that question. And then just in terms of support and impact on staff, there's two questions that I think are related. One is about how did the fact that you sort of allowed recovery breaks work for yourselves? So, for example, did staff still need, or people still need, sick notes, or was there some flexibility? And then what support was there for staff coming back onto duty who had suffered trauma, for example, if they're being wrongly accused of work-related issues?
So first point, it depended on the period of leave, if that makes sense. So in some situations, if people had ongoing things that they knew there were particular, for example, maybe particular dates that triggered things for them, we could work with them to use things like holiday and flexi time and stuff like that. So actually they could manage it within their own processes that they had as an employee. And that actually felt quite empowering for people to be able to manage their own journey within that and not have to necessarily say I need to take time off sick, for example. So that was quite useful for some people. For others, where they did need to take prolonged times off sick, then yes, there would, we were able to self-certificate, or they were able to self-certificate for the first 5 days, and that was part of the processes of BHT, which I think is fairly standard anyway. And then after that, they would need a sick note. But again, it was a supportive process and able to do that, if you see what I mean. So it wasn't kind of right, you need to go to your doctor and you need to go and get this done. It was a conversation that was had with that person about, actually, we just need to get this sorted. So let's see about, you know, how comfortable are you doing that? Do you need any support with doing that? Can we help with that? That sort of thing. So it was kind of standard processes, but done in a supportive way. I guess that's the thing. Sorry, what was the second part of the question? I've forgotten now. I've answered that one.
That was, it was about staff coming back on duty, but
Yeah.
I was just going to, I've got just a couple more questions.
Yeah.
I'm conscious that it's coming up to the end of the
Sure,
session.
yes, no worries.
Coming through. One attendee wondered whether there was any indication of employers downloading your toolkit to use when employing people with multiple and complex needs. Have you had any sense of that sort of impact?
Well, unfortunately, our website just gives us numbers at the moment. However, we've done quite a few webinars like this sort of thing. Over the last year, we did our first one back in January 2021, I think, around the sharing the learning. So we've been sort of doing lots of sort of webinars around that, and we know from those that people have downloaded it and used it in terms of working with and employing people with lived experience. So I can't give you figures or statistics, unfortunately, which I'd love to. We'd love to have that as well, just to really prove that definite link. But we do know it's happening, and people are starting to do that. And certainly BHT Sussex, the charity that we come under and work within, are committed to doing that and to using the toolkit to do that, to support people. So they've already started. Some of their roles now are much more around kind of having lived experience as a valued asset, rather than it's kind of listed on the application and on the person spec now as a kind of valuable experience to have alongside all of the others. So that's a positive in our book. So.
And so somebody else in the chat's wondering whether HR departments in general would benefit from sort of learning from your work and encouraging people.
Yeah, I think that we've been trying to sort of target with our promotion and marketing stuff over this last few months, things like HR departments and kind of tapping into organisations and trying to encourage even individual managers to take back to their HR departments and things like that. So I think absolutely our HR department have been phenomenal, and they've had to work, obviously they have to work within the law and they have to work within the processes that they, you know, are quite restrictive sometimes, but actually they have been incredibly flexible and really supportive of us, but again really upfront and honest about what we can and can't do, if you see what I mean. So I think absolutely HR departments are pivotal in this work and in kind of moving this stuff forward, but it's about developing that relationship with your HR department, I think, and really having those conversations and saying, actually, this in the long term this will really help, because if you've not got employees that you're having to kind of do all that penalising stuff and, you know, looking at disciplinaries and all of that kind of stuff, which was inevitably where it used to go before, because there was no middle ground. It was like you either perform your job or you don't, you know, and actually there's this whole massive middle ground where we can support people, so it doesn't have to get to that bit. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you ever so much, Andre.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Workshop. I'm going to have to cut that short there now with the questions, and thank you to all the attendees who have posed their questions for you.
Thank you.
Just to say that in a moment I'll post in the chat the link to the Fulfilling Lives website, which has also got links back to Fulfilling Lives South East, before people get hold of your presentation, to be able to find out your own personal links for that. And just to remind everybody, we're about to go into the lunch break, but if you want to stay online whilst having your lunch, there'll be a photo gallery featuring images from the last 8 years of the Fulfilling Lives, which will be streaming for about the next half hour. But please be back at your computer ready to click onto the link when your online programme will be starting again at 1:40, so we'll try and catch up a bit of time, but we really appreciate everybody who's been sat there for the last couple of hours, and but hopefully it's all been very enjoyable. So we'll see you again this afternoon. As I say, I'll put the link to the website now into the chat. Thanks ever so much, Andre.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.